So back to the Kamala Harris angle from this Atlantic thing. There was another interesting. So you brought up before that Josh Shapiro rubbed Kamala up the wrong way by saying, where can I put my artwork? Can the Smithsonian donate anything? Like, what type of couches can I get in? I can see how that would anger you. But the other angle I was getting from what Kamala Harris was saying, both in the Atlantic and otherwise, was that she was incredibly frustrated in her time as vice president by how little power she had. She just felt she was like a fly on the wall. It was all with Biden. She wished she could have made changes, whatever changes she wanted to make. She's never really identified, but she wanted to make them anyway. But we have two sides of Kamala Harris now. We have the side that says, I wish I had more power as vice president. And then this other side that says, whoever would be my vice president has absolutely no more power than I had. So, which one is she? Can you be both? Is it just pure vindictiveness?
To get into the mind of Kamala Harris is a tricky task to do. But you're absolutely right. I mean, Biden, they uplifted her as their border czar. Democrats hate when you say that, but it's true. They gave her the task. A lot of vice presidents have a task. I think, notably, Vice President Vance does not have a task, which is a good thing, because if you have a task, you're inevitably going to fall short, and then you're going to get the blame either from your party or the other party. That said, clearly Biden's inner circle didn't feel like they could trust her. They didn't take her super seriously, and they didn't give her they didn't really uplift her or showcase her in any way. But then lo and behold, once Joe Biden finally, after that disastrous debate, she finally, becomes the de facto nominee. They don't have any sort of nomination process. She's figuring out, okay, who do I want to be my running mate during this 3-month cycle? She looks at somebody like Josh Shapiro, who's clearly extremely ambitious, obviously wants to be president, very outspoken. And she probably thinks to herself, okay, this guy is going to outshine me, right? And I'm tired of being outshined already in the VP's residence. So, after this fraud scandal broke out in Minnesota, well, it actually broke out a while ago, which I'm sure we'll get to in a moment. I was thinking to myself, like, how did Tim Walz get through this VP vetting process? And I think one of the reasons is that, Kamala Harris looked at him. He comes across as this really folksy guy. I lost track of the number of times campaign reporters called him folksy. But she saw a guy who has a close-knit family, seems really friendly, and is relatively non-controversial in her mind. So she thinks, okay, he's the path of least resistance. And that was kind of her calculus for picking a VP nominee.
I think you've hit the nail on the head. But let's really unpack that, right? So Josh Shapiro gets asked, you an Israeli spy, have you ever talked to an Israeli spy? There's all these anti-Israel questions. It is full on. It's offensive, but it is very full on. And I know there's some backgrounding now. Actually, Tim Walz had the same questions about his links to China. But it just strikes me that, why were you so gung-ho on getting to the bottom of Josh Shapiro, if there is a bottom to get to? But you're so gung-ho on getting to the bottom of Josh Shapiro. But all of this fraud stuff, which, as you write in the National Review, that's his undoing. All this fraud stuff, that's just, we can figure that out in the campaign. We don't really need to worry about that. How does that not get flagged as this is potentially, this could sink us?
So in fairness, that really wasn't discussed much by Republicans during the campaign. What's so fascinating is, a lot of the Somali fraud angle with the daycares. That's something that's really blown up in recent months. There's been a lot of investigative reporting on that, as there should be. But a ton of this fraud stuff had already been really public, even years before the 2024 election. In 2022, I believe, the Justice Department, under Joe Biden, again, a Democratic president, while Kamala Harris was in office, indicted, I believe, 47 individuals for what's called this Feeding Our Future. It's a new federal nutrition assistance program, federally funded in Minnesota, for fraud. So that's already dozens of people who were indicted under this program that was, extremely fraudulent under Walz's tenure. Along with that, there was already, a few weeks before Tim Walz was tapped to be her VP nominee, there were a bunch of state legislative audits that came out about a bunch of other fraud, waste, and mismanagement that had occurred under the Walz administration in a bunch of different state level agencies. So again, while the Somali angle wasn't completely clear until recently, a lot of this stuff was really public. And as I reported in my piece last week, the Harris vetting team, they did find this. And they saw it as a potential, red flag, potential weakness. But again, they just didn't see it as something that would tip the election. And in fairness, If you go back to the vice presidential debate, there was only one between Walz and Vice President Vance, now Vice President Vance, where Walz did not perform very well. The fraud issue didn't come up either by the moderators or by Vance. So even Republicans didn't really bring it up, which is really interesting. Instead, they focused a lot on his policies that he had passed related to gender transition for minors, tampons in young boys' locker rooms in schools, that kind of stuff that would really play with voters. And I guess, long story short, Republicans already had so much else to work with under the Biden presidency, the economy and immigration, that wasn't something that really tipped the scales.
Yeah, because like I completely agree with you that it wasn't a big focus, but I think it's just because they had so much else to work with Tim Walz. I mean, you raised the gender transition thing, like. He's bought in, it seemed to me, he's bought in because they're worried that Kamala Harris can't appeal to blue-collar working class white Democrats and swing voters like that. And they go, well, Tim Walz, he likes football. He used to be a coach, he looks fun. He looks like your uncle. But the Republicans so quickly were able to get the tampon Tim name around America. It became such like a catch cry against him. It's just so bizarre to me that they would pick a vice president whose biggest, it's weird that his biggest scandal, the thing that undoes his entire career, the thing that besmirches him in the history books, isn't even the biggest attacking point against him in a presidential campaign. I don't really have a question there other than why Tim Walz?
I know it's really wild. Another thing is, I mentioned this, I believe, but she looked at his family. He has a couple kids. He's close with his wife, and that was seen as a strength for him. Because she is married. She got married when she was a little bit older. She has stepkids, so that was seen as something that could balance out the ticket, his tight knit family. But another thing that was really interesting is, one in the U.S. one of the biggest things that was a huge issue for him beyond the gender transition issue and just his, record for being a really progressive governor were some of his exaggerations about his military experience, which is a huge deal in the US to do that. So he said something, I'm paraphrasing here, but when he was running for governor in 2018, he made this comment where he said, the weapons of war that I carried in war. Now, he served in National Guard, which is a very respectable thing to do, but he was never deployed in a combat zone. So when you exaggerate your combat experience that you never actually had, that's a really big deal and does not play well with veterans, independent voters. But what was so interesting is I asked some former Kamala Harris campaign aides, did you guys find this? And they did not find that in their vetting, which, was really shocking because he said that in his 2018 race. So the fact that they didn't flag that, and when they got a press inquiry about it, they were shocked about it, was kind of alarming.
Yeah, that is absolutely bizarre. I'd say America has a lot of very interesting will be the Jermaine way of saying it, but a lot of weird people that nearly got to be vice president. A lot of very strange choices, and I'm just wondering where's Tim Walz going to rank in that? Because to me, this is a guy that literally, this is just me speaking here, but he seemed to literally get to within a couple of swing states away from being vice president, purely because he once called Republicans weird a couple of times.
Mm-hmm.
You think in history, Dan Quayle can't spell potato, Sarah Palin, less said about that, the better. But does Tim Walz really flare up as just, this will be a historical oddity that how close someone with this little experience and charm and ability got within vice presidency?
I certainly think that it should be. I think another thing to really underscore is, again, how few campaign reporters gave him a really hard time trying to unearth scandals about him, looking into the fraud scandals. My colleague Jim Garrity at National Review wrote a piece about the fraud, waste, and mismanagement under his, again, 2 terms of being governor. He wrote a piece, the week he was picked, but there are very few reporters who did that. Again, the number of times I read the word folksy to describe him in pieces in mainstream news outlets was alarming. He got pretty much a free pass. Again, this was a pretty quick presidential race, but I think moving forward, I asked some Democrats about what's next for him because he decided amid this fraud scandal not to run for another term as governor. I think he probably had a lot of Democrats chirping in his ear, you better leave office because we don't want to deal with this anymore. And I think a lot of people are really pleased that Amy Klobuchar, a current U.S. Senator, is likely going to be the Democrats' gubernatorial nominee. Because without that, I think without a strong candidate, to succeed him without clearing out the primary. I think there'd be a lot of frustrated Democrats who'd be speaking more publicly about how embarrassing he's been in the party.
To watch a full conversation between me and Audrey, where we touch on Josh Shapiro, Tim Walz, Kamala Harris, who is going to be running in 2028, please click the link in the description below, which will take you to the full interview. And if you're not already, please subscribe to Sky News Australia so you can stay up to date with not just my videos, but all of the other videos we have here from all of our excellent commentators.